Hello, dear listener. Welcome back to another gentle journey through time. Tonight, we're going to step away from the grand sweep of history, the kings and battles, the rise and fall of empires, and instead, we're going to spend time with someone whose name history never recorded, but whose work fed the world, one loaf at a time. Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. And if you're comfortable, share in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? I love reading those. It feels like we're all falling asleep together, even from far away. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort as we travel back nearly 700 years to a small village in the English countryside, sometime in the early 14th century. The year doesn't matter so much. What matters is the rhythm of life, the cycle of days that repeated with the same gentle constancy as the turning of the seasons. Picture, if you will, a village of perhaps 200 souls. Timber-framed houses with thatched roofs huddle together along dirt roads that turn to mud in the rain and dust in the summer heat. There's a small stone church at the village center, its bell tower reaching toward heaven like a prayer made manifest. Gardens sprawl behind homes, filled with herbs and vegetables that will sustain families through the long winter months ahead. And there, on the main thoroughfare, sits a modest building with thick stone walls and small windows glazed with precious glass. This is our bakery. Above the heavy wooden door hangs a simple painted sign, a golden sheaf of wheat against a brown background. No words are needed. Most villagers cannot read anyway. The symbol tells them everything they need to know. Inside these walls lives and works Master Thomas, our baker. He is 35 years old, which makes him neither young nor old by the standards of his time. His hands are permanently dusted with flour, his arms strong from years of kneading, his back slightly bent from leaning over work tables. He learned his trade from his father, who learned it from his father before him, in an unbroken chain stretching back through generations. Thomas doesn't think of himself as feeding a community, though that's exactly what he does. He simply thinks of himself as a man who makes bread. Good bread. Honest bread. Bread that will fill bellies and provide strength for the day's work ahead. It's a simple calling, but there's profound dignity in its simplicity. Tonight, we're going to follow Thomas through one complete day of his life. From the moment he wakes in the deep darkness before dawn, to the time he finally rests his head on his straw-filled pillow as the village settles into sleep around him. We'll experience the rhythm of medieval life at its most fundamental level, the daily creation of the staff of life itself. There will be no drama in our story tonight. No villains or heroes, no great revelations or shocking twists. Just the gentle, methodical work of a craftsman who takes pride in his calling. Just the quiet beauty of routine, the meditation of meaningful labor, and the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something essential with your own two hands. So settle in, dear listener. Let the modern world fade away. Let yourself be lulled by the ancient rhythms we're about to explore together. And let us begin at the very beginning, in the quiet hours before the sun first touches the eastern sky. The first thing Thomas hears is not a sound, but the absence of sound. In the deep heart of the night, when even the village dogs have settled into sleep and the last embers in hearths have dimmed to glowing ash, there exists a quality of silence that our modern world has nearly forgotten. It's not the dead quiet of a soundproofed room, but rather a living stillness, the gentle breathing of a world at rest. Thomas doesn't need a clock to tell him when to wake. His body has learned the rhythm over 15 years of rising before dawn. Somewhere deep in his bones, he feels the subtle shift that tells him morning is still hours away, but it's time to begin. The darkness outside his small window is complete, velvet black and star-studded on this clear autumn night. He lies still for a moment, gathering himself. The straw in his mattress rustles softly as he shifts, and he can hear his wife Margaret's steady breathing beside him. She'll sleep for several hours more. Her day begins with the sunrise, not before it. In the smaller bed across the room, their young son William sleeps the deep, untroubled sleep of childhood. The air in the room is crisp and cool. Autumn has arrived in earnest now, and soon the first frost will silver the thatched roofs and garden plots. Thomas can smell it in the air. That clean, sharp scent that speaks of changing seasons and the harvest safely gathered in. From the chest at the foot of his bed, he retrieves the clothes he laid out the night before. A woolen tunic, dark brown and well-worn but clean. Thick stockings that his wife knitted during the long evenings of the previous winter. And his leather shoes, soft-soled and comfortable for the long hours of standing ahead. He dresses quietly, by feel more than sight. Every movement is economical, practiced. These same motions have begun every day for years, and his body knows them as surely as it knows how to breathe. When he's dressed, he pauses at the bedside, listening to the peaceful sounds of his sleeping family. In a few hours, this room will be filled with the warm golden light of morning, with the sounds of waking and conversation and the beginning of another day. But for now, it belongs to dreams. Thomas makes his way carefully down the narrow wooden stairs, one hand trailing along the wall to guide him. The stairs creak softly under his weight, familiar sounds that speak of home and routine. At the bottom, he enters the main room of their dwelling, which serves as both kitchen and gathering place. The large fireplace dominates one wall, its stones still radiating a gentle warmth from the previous evening's fire. But it's not to the fireplace that Thomas goes first. Instead, he moves to a smaller door that leads directly into his bakery. This connection between home and workplace is one of the great conveniences of his life. No morning journey through cold streets, no time lost in travel. He simply steps from one room into another, from the domestic world into the professional one. The bakery is darker than the house, its thick stone walls holding the night's chill. Thomas moves by memory and long practice to the shelf where he keeps his tallow candles. The flint and steel are exactly where he left them, and soon a small flame flickers to life. The candlelight pushes back the darkness just enough to reveal the familiar shapes of his workspace. The large wooden table where he kneads dough, the stone shelves lined with baskets and bowls, the great oven that dominates the far wall like a sleeping giant. He lights a second candle, then a third, placing them carefully around the room until he has enough light to work by. The flames dance gently in the still air, casting shifting shadows on the walls and creating an atmosphere of quiet mystery. There's something almost sacred about these early morning hours, when he alone is awake and the rest of the world sleeps on, unaware of the work beginning in this small stone room. Thomas's first task is always the same: checking his starter. This bowl of fermented dough has been the foundation of his bread for more than a decade. It sits on a shelf in the coolest part of the bakery, covered with a clean linen cloth that his wife washes fresh each week. When he lifts the cloth, the sharp, yeasty smell rises to greet him. a scent that speaks of fermentation and life, of the mysterious transformation that turns simple flour and water into the foundation of sustenance. The starter is alive, bubbling gently with the activity of wild yeasts captured from the air years ago and carefully maintained ever since. Thomas learned the care of starter from his father, who learned it from his father before him. The yeasts in this bowl might well be descendants of those that fed his grandfather's family, an unbroken line of microscopic life that connects him to his past and will, God willing, connect him to his future. He measures out a portion of the starter into a large wooden bowl, then adds warm water from the pitcher he keeps near the banked coals of the oven. The water has been sitting since the previous evening, warming gradually to the perfect temperature, not hot enough to kill the delicate yeasts, but warm enough to encourage their activity. Thomas has never heard of yeast, of course. He knows only that some mysterious quality in his starter makes the bread rise, and that this quality can be killed by water that's too hot or weakened by conditions that are too cold. To the starter and water he adds flour. Not the white, refined flour of later centuries, but whole grain flour ground from wheat that grew in the fields surrounding his village just weeks ago. The flour is coarse and flecked with bits of bran, full of the earthy flavor that comes from grain that has been grown, harvested, and ground within a few miles of where it will be consumed. Thomas works the ingredients together with a wooden spoon, then with his hands, feeling the dough come together beneath his fingers. The texture is familiar, comforting, neither too wet nor too dry, but finding that perfect balance that will yield bread with a tender crumb and a crust that cracks pleasantly when broken. The kneading that follows is a meditation. Thomas turns the dough out onto his work table, which bears the scars and stains of countless mornings just like this one. He presses the heel of his hand into the dough, folds it over, turns it a quarter turn, and presses again. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic. Press, fold, turn. Press, fold, turn. The dough gradually transforms beneath his hands, becoming smoother, more elastic, developing the structure that will trap the gases produced by fermentation and create the light, airy texture that turns mere flour and water into something transcendent. As he kneads, Thomas lets his mind wander. He thinks about the day ahead, how many loaves he'll need, which customers will likely appear at his door, whether the weather will hold fair or turn to rain. He thinks about his son William, growing so quickly, already beginning to ask questions about the bakery and the work that goes on here. Perhaps in a few years, the boy will be old enough to help, to begin learning the craft that has sustained their family for generations. The dough tells him when it's ready. The texture changes subtly, becoming smooth and responsive, no longer fighting his manipulation but yielding to it with elastic grace. Thomas shapes it into a round, places it in a bowl, and covers it with a damp cloth. The first fermentation has begun, a process that will take several hours and transform the dense mass of dough into something light and airy, ready to be shaped into loaves. While the dough rises, Thomas tends to his fire. The great stone oven requires careful management, and building the proper heat is an art that takes years to master. He arranges dry wood in the oven's chamber, oak and beech, aged and seasoned, that will burn hot and clean. The kindling catches quickly, and soon flames dance merrily in the oven's mouth, their light flickering against the smoke-blackened stones. As the fire builds, Thomas prepares for the rest of his morning's work. He measures out flour for additional batches of dough, checks his supplies of salt and herbs, arranges his tools in the order he'll need them. Everything has its place, and everything is in its place. The orderly habits of a craftsman who has learned that efficiency and quality go hand in hand. The bakery gradually warms as the fire burns, and the first batch of dough begins its slow rise. Outside, the night maintains its hold, but Thomas can sense the subtle shift that tells him dawn is still hours away but no longer impossibly distant. Soon, other early risers will begin to stir, the miller checking his wheel, the blacksmith banking his forge, the farmers preparing for another day in the fields. But for now, Thomas works alone in his circle of candlelight, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the quiet satisfaction of work well begun. The bread that will feed his village today is already taking shape, molecule by molecule, bubble by bubble, in the slow alchemy of fermentation. And Thomas, keeper of an ancient craft, guardian of as the first pale hint of dawn begins to touch the eastern sky, not yet light, but a subtle lessening of the darkness, Thomas checks his dough. The first batch has been rising for nearly 3 hours now, and when he lifts the damp cloth that covers it, he's greeted by exactly what he hoped to see. The dough has doubled in size, its surface smooth and slightly domed, with that particular smell that tells an experienced baker the fermentation has proceeded perfectly. He punches the dough gently, pressing out the largest gas bubbles while preserving the airy structure that will give his bread its texture. The dough sighs softly as the gas escapes, deflating slightly but maintaining its supple, elastic character. Thomas has performed this action thousands of times, but he still finds satisfaction in the way the dough responds to his touch, alive and responsive, ready for the next stage of its transformation. Working quickly now, but without haste, Thomas divides the large mass of dough into portions. Each piece will become a loaf, and he's learned through years of experience exactly how much dough will yield a loaf of the right size for his customers' needs. Too small, and families will run short before the next day's bread is ready. Too large, and the bread may go stale before it can be consumed, a waste that no medieval household can afford. He shapes each portion with practiced hands, rolling and folding the dough to create the surface tension that will help the loaves hold their shape as they rise and bake. Some he forms into round cobs, others into long, narrow shapes that will bake quickly and provide more crust for those customers who prefer it. A few smaller portions become rolls, perfect for children or for travelers who need bread they can carry easily. Each shaped loaf goes onto a wooden board dusted with flour, where it will undergo its final rise. Thomas covers them with clean linen cloths, not too tightly, as the dough needs room to expand, but snugly enough to prevent the surface from drying out. The cloths are soft from many washings, and they smell faintly of the herbs Margaret uses when she boils the laundry, lavender and rosemary from their garden, gathered during the summer months and dried for winter use. While the shaped loaves rise, Thomas turns his attention to his specialty breads. These are the loaves that set his bakery apart from others in neighboring villages. Breads that incorporate ingredients beyond the basic flour, water, salt, and starter that form the foundation of everyday bread. From a wooden box, he takes a handful of caraway seeds, their sharp, distinctive fragrance filling the air as he measures them into a small bowl. These seeds came from plants that grow wild in the meadows around the village, gathered by the children during late summer expeditions that combine work with play. The seeds will be kneaded into a portion of dough, creating a bread that's especially popular with the village's older residents, who remember their grandmothers making similar loaves. He prepares another specialty dough with dried herbs, thyme and sage from Margaret's carefully tended garden, harvested at the peak of their flavor and dried in small bundles that hung from the rafters of their kitchen throughout the late summer. The herbs will infuse the bread with a subtle, earthy flavor that pairs beautifully with cheese or the salt pork that many families rely on during the winter months. A third variety incorporates dried fruit, apples from the orchard just outside the village, sliced thin and dried in the autumn sun until they're leathery and concentrated with sweetness. This fruit bread is a luxury, saved for special occasions or traded for other precious goods. The apples add not just flavor but precious nutrients that help ward off the dietary deficiencies that can plague communities during the long months when fresh produce is scarce. As Thomas works, incorporating these special ingredients into portions of dough, the oven continues to heat. The fire has burned down somewhat from its initial fierce blaze, but the stones are absorbing and holding the heat, gradually reaching the temperature that will bake bread to perfection. Thomas judges the heat not with thermometers, which haven't been invented yet, but with senses honed by years of experience. He holds his hand inside the oven opening, feeling the intensity of the radiant heat against his palm. Too hot, and the outside of the loaves will burn before the inside can cook through. Too cool, and the bread will emerge pale and dense, lacking the beautiful golden crust that marks properly baked bread. Thomas nods to himself. The temperature is climbing toward the sweet spot he's looking for, but it's not quite there yet. Outside, the world is beginning to wake. Through the small windows of his bakery, Thomas can see that the sky has lightened from black to deep gray, and the first birds are beginning to sing. Soon, the village will stir to life. Shutters will open, dogs will bark, children will emerge from houses to begin their daily chores. But for now, the streets remain quiet, and Thomas continues his solitary work. He checks the shaped loaves that are undergoing their final rise. The dough has grown noticeably, filling out into plump, promising shapes that speak of the light, airy bread they'll become. Using a sharp knife, Thomas scores the surface of each loaf, not just for decoration, but for function. The cuts will control how the bread expands as it bakes, preventing the crust from bursting randomly and ensuring that each loaf develops the even, attractive appearance that customers expect. The scoring patterns are both practical and beautiful. Some loaves receive a simple cross, others a series of parallel cuts that will open into attractive ridges as the bread bakes. The herb bread gets a more elaborate pattern, a wheat sheaf design that identifies its special nature and marks it as worth the extra cost Thomas charges for specialty loaves. As the morning light gradually strengthens, Thomas can hear the first sounds of the village waking. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a rooster crows, though most of the chickens are still roosting. The miller's wheel begins to turn. Thomas can hear the familiar creaking and splashing as water flows through the channels that power the great stones that grind grain into flour. The oven is nearly ready now. Thomas removes the last of the burning wood, using a long-handled wooden peel to rake out the coals and ashes. The stone floor of the oven is clean and ready, its surface hot enough that a few drops of water would dance and evaporate instantly. This is the moment that requires the most skilled judging, when the oven has reached that perfect temperature that will create bread with a crisp, golden crust and a tender, fully cooked interior. Using his wooden peel, a tool that looks like a giant wooden spatula. Thomas begins loading the risen loaves into the oven. Each one must be placed carefully, with enough space around it for heat to circulate but close enough together to make efficient use of the oven's capacity. The largest loaves go in first, as they'll need the longest baking time. The rolls and smaller specialty breads will follow later, when the oven temperature has dropped slightly. As each loaf slides from the peel onto the hot stone floor of the oven, it begins to transform almost immediately. The heat hits the surface of the dough, and Thomas can hear the subtle sizzling as moisture begins to turn to steam. The loaves will rise one final time in the oven's heat, what bakers call oven spring, before the crust sets and the interior finishes cooking. Thomas seals the oven opening with a heavy wooden door, trapping the heat inside and creating the even, radiant environment that will turn his carefully shaped dough into the bread that will sustain his community for another day. The hardest work of the morning is done. Now comes the waiting, the patient monitoring, the careful timing that will determine whether this batch of bread emerges perfect or merely adequate. Outside his bakery, the village continues its gentle awakening. Thomas can hear children's voices now, and the sound of wooden shutters being thrown open to admit the growing light. Soon, his first customers will appear at his door, drawn by the incomparable aroma that's beginning to emanate from his oven. The smell of baking bread that has called to hungry people since civilization began. The first customer arrives just as the sun clears the horizon, painting the thatched roofs of the village in shades of gold and amber. Thomas hears the familiar sound of wooden clogs on the stone threshold of his bakery, followed by a gentle knock on the heavy door. He opens it to find old Martha, the widow who lives in the cottage nearest the church, her gray hair neatly braided beneath a clean linen cap. "Good morning, Master Thomas," she says, her voice carrying the particular quality of someone who has been awake for some time but is still easing into the day. "Might you have a small loaf ready? Just enough for an old woman who doesn't eat as much as she once did." Thomas smiles and gestures her inside. Martha has been one of his regular customers for more than a decade, ever since her husband passed and she no longer needed the large family loaves she once purchased. She's precise in her needs. A small round cob that will last her exactly 2 days, no more and no less. She's also one of the few customers who doesn't mind waiting if the bread isn't quite ready. Often sitting on the wooden stool Thomas keeps near the door and sharing the gentle gossip that flows through small communities like water through a stream. "The morning loaves are just finishing," Thomas tells her, checking the color of the crusts through the small window in his oven door. "Perhaps another few minutes. Would you care to wait?" Martha settles onto her usual stool with the careful movements of someone whose joints protest the morning chill. "I have nowhere more pressing to be," she says, folding her hands in her lap. "The morning is too beautiful to rush through anyway." As if summoned by her words, the bakery fills with the aroma that Thomas has learned to read like a language. The smell of baking bread changes as the loaves cook, beginning with the yeasty scent of fermenting dough, developing into the more complex fragrance of browning crusts, and finally reaching that perfect moment when the bread is done. Thomas has learned to identify this moment not just by smell, but by sound as well. The loaves speak to him as they bake, the crusts crackling and singing as steam escapes and the interior finishes cooking. "Young William grows taller every time I see him," Martha observes, speaking of Thomas's son. Soon he'll be wanting to learn the trade, I expect. Thomas nods, using his long wooden peel to check the progress of the bread through the oven's mouth. He's begun asking questions about the work. Yesterday he wanted to know why we need the dough, and I found myself trying to explain something I've always simply known. That's the way of it, Martha says with a soft laugh. We do what our fathers taught us, and their fathers taught them, and suddenly we must put words to knowledge that lives in our hands rather than our heads. The first batch of loaves is ready. Thomas can tell by the deep golden color of the crusts and the hollow sound they make when he taps them with his knuckle. Using his peel, he slides them out of the oven one by one, the hot bread crackling as it meets the cooler air of the bakery. Steam rises from each loaf, carrying with it the incomparable scent of fresh bread that draws customers like nothing else can. Martha's small loaf is perfect, golden brown, with the cross Thomas scored on its surface opened into attractive ridges. He wraps it in a clean cloth and hands it to her, accepting in return the small copper coins that represent a fair price for both baker and customer. As she prepares to leave, 2 more customers appear at the door. The second customer is young Robert, the carpenter's apprentice, who comes not for bread but with a trade proposal. In his arms, he carries a beautifully crafted wooden bowl, its interior smooth as silk and its exterior decorated with simple but elegant carved patterns. Master Thomas, Robert says, setting the bowl carefully on the counter. I've just finished this piece, and I was hoping we might arrange a trade. My master has been praising your herb bread, and I thought perhaps. He trails off hopefully. Thomas examines the bowl, running his fingers over the smooth wood and admiring the craftsmanship. It's exactly the sort of bowl that's useful in a bakery. Large enough for mixing, beautiful enough to display on a shelf when not in use. The trade is fair, good craftsmanship exchanged for good bread, the sort of arrangement that keeps small communities functioning without the need for money to change hands for every transaction. A loaf of the herb bread, and perhaps a few rolls for your journey to the next village? Thomas suggests, remembering that Robert's master has been hired to repair the church door in the neighboring settlement. Robert's face lights up. That would be more than fair, Master Thomas. My master will be pleased. As Thomas wraps the herb bread, its surface fragrant with thyme and sage, more customers begin to arrive. The bakery, so quiet in the pre-dawn hours, now buzzes with gentle activity. There's Anna the weaver, trading a length of linen cloth for a week's worth of bread for her large family. There's Peter the shepherd, who brings a small jar of honey from his beehives in exchange for sweet rolls that will serve as his midday meal while he tends his flocks in the distant pastures. Each transaction is more than just commerce. It's a connection, a conversation, a small thread in the web of relationships that holds the community together. Thomas learns that Anna's youngest daughter is finally over the fever that kept the family worried for a week. Peter shares news that he spotted the first flocks of geese flying south, a sure sign that winter is approaching more quickly than expected. The morning crowd reaches its peak as the church bell rings the hour that marks the beginning of the main working day. Farmers stop by for bread to take to the fields, their faces already showing the healthy color that comes from outdoor work. Village craftsmen, the blacksmith, the cooper, the wheelwright, purchase loaves that will sustain them through long hours of physical labor. Thomas moves efficiently among his customers, his hands automatically selecting the right size and type of bread for each person's needs. Mrs. Eleanor, the miller's wife, prefers the darker, denser bread made with rye flour, heartier fare that suits her husband's demanding work. The village priest chooses one of Thomas's finest white loaves, made with flour that's been sifted to remove most of the bran, a luxury befitting his station and necessary for the communion wafers he'll prepare later in the week. Each loaf that leaves the bakery represents hours of Thomas's work, from the careful maintenance of his starter, through the long process of mixing, kneading, rising, and shaping, to the final crucial moments of baking. But more than that, each loaf represents his place in the community, his contribution to the daily miracle that keeps people fed and healthy and able to do their own work. As the morning rush subsides, Thomas takes a moment to assess his remaining inventory. Several loaves remain, along with most of the rolls and a few of his specialty breads. This is exactly what he hopes for, enough left to serve the occasional customer who arrives later in the day, but not so much that he'll have stale bread tomorrow. Calculating this balance is one of the skills that separates successful bakers from those who struggle, and Thomas has learned to read his community's needs with the accuracy that comes only from years of careful observation. The bakery grows quieter as the morning's customers disperse to their various labors. Thomas uses the lull to clean his workspace, preparing for the next day's work. He feeds his starter, mixing in fresh flour and water to maintain the living culture that forms the foundation of his craft. He washes his bowls and tools, arranging them in their proper places so that tomorrow morning's work can begin smoothly. Outside, the village has settled into its daytime rhythm. Children run through the streets, their voices bright with laughter, as they play games that have been passed down through generations. Women gather at the well in the village center, drawing water and sharing news while their buckets fill. Men work in the fields that surround the village, harvesting the last of the autumn crops before the first frost makes such work impossible. Thomas steps outside his bakery for a moment, breathing deeply of the crisp autumn air. The sky is a brilliant blue, scattered with white clouds that drift slowly toward the horizon. The trees that line the village streets are dressed in their autumn finery, gold and red and orange leaves that will soon carpet the ground and provide mulch for next year's gardens. From where he stands, Thomas can see most of his small world. There's the church where he was baptized and married, where his son was baptized in turn. There's the manor house where the local lord lives, its stone walls speaking of permanence and authority. There are the fields where grain grows, the orchards heavy with fruit, the pastures where cattle and sheep graze peacefully. It's a small world by the standards of later centuries, but it's complete. Everything needed for life is here: food, shelter, community, purpose. Thomas knows that there are great cities beyond the horizons, places where thousands of people live in ways he can barely imagine. He knows that there are kingdoms and empires, wars and politics, discoveries and inventions happening in the wider world. But here, in this village, in this moment, everything needed for a good life exists within walking distance. Thomas returns to his bakery, where the last few loaves sit cooling on their wooden boards, filling the air with the lingering scent of perfect bread. In a few hours, the day's work will be truly finished, and he'll be able to sit with his family for their evening meal. But for now, there's still time for the quiet satisfaction of work well done, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another day of the same meaningful labor, the daily creation of sustenance, the ancient craft that connects him to every baker who came before and everyone who will come after. The busiest part of the day has passed. The scent of baked bread still lingers faintly in the air, warm, sweet, and earthy, though the oven's fire has begun to fade. The last customer left more than an hour ago, exchanging a quiet thank you and a nod before disappearing down the dusty path beyond the square. Now the bakery is still again. The wooden counter is empty, save for a few crumbs and a single cooling loaf, one the baker saved for himself. A small round roll, browned perfectly at the top, with a soft split down its center where steam once escaped. He picks it up and turns it slowly in his hand, admiring the simplicity of it. So much labor, and yet the result is quiet, uncomplicated, whole. He wipes the counter clean with a damp cloth, brushing flour and husks into his palm. He moves slowly, not out of exhaustion but care. The day's rhythm has slowed now, and there is no need to rush. No need to fill silence with sound. Outside, the sun has climbed high and begun its gentle descent. The golden afternoon light seeps in through the small front window, casting long, soft-edged shadows across the stone floor. The bakery glows faintly, touched by that golden hue that only comes once a day, when everything seems to hold its breath, as if listening. The baker steps out into the square, wiping his hands on his apron as he goes. He walks with slow purpose, not far, just a few steps across the way to a low wooden bench beneath a wide old elm tree. Its branches sway gently overhead, leaves rustling like whispers. The air is still warm, but gentler now, touched by a breeze that carries the scent of herbs from a nearby garden and the distant sound of a cow lowing beyond the hill. He sits. The bench creaks slightly beneath him, and he leans back, letting his shoulders drop for the first time since morning. He tears a small piece of bread from the roll and places it in his mouth, chewing slowly. It is still slightly warm. The crust is firm, the inside soft and springy, with a faint tang from the sourdough. He tastes salt, grain, and thyme. From his place beneath the elm, he can see the heart of the village. Children chase each other between houses, their laughter high and light. A woman draws water from the well. Two old men sit on opposite ends of a barrel, playing a game with carved stones. A rooster struts nearby, pecking absently at the ground. All of it moves with an unhurried rhythm. The baker watches it all with quiet satisfaction, not as an outsider, but as one thread in the fabric of it. His work is already moving through the town, in the hands of the widow wrapping a warm loaf in cloth, in the crumbs on a child's lip, in the breakfast of a farmer who rose even before he did. He does not speak. He does not need to. His thoughts drift backward, as they often do during these quiet hours. He remembers the smell of his father's bakery, the first one many years ago in a village smaller than this. He remembers sitting on a stool, swinging his legs as his father shaped dough with thick, sure hands. He remembers the sound of laughter, the slap of wet dough on wood, the low hum of fire in the stone oven. Those days felt endless then, timeless, and now somehow he carries them still. He takes another bite of bread and breathes deeply. A sparrow hops near his feet, pausing to peer up at him. He tears a small piece from his roll and tosses it gently to the ground. The bird hops closer, pecks once, then flutters away in a soft burst of feathers and breeze. The sun dips lower now, and the light begins to turn amber. It drapes the rooftops in gold and casts flickering shadows through the leaves above. The village grows quieter. The laughter fades. A door creaks open. A bell rings faintly in the chapel tower. The baker stands slowly, rolling his shoulders as he rises. His hands are dry, dusted still with faint flour he missed in his earlier cleaning. He walks back toward the bakery, trailing one hand along the wall as he goes. The stone is warm beneath his fingertips, storing the heat of the day. Inside, the fire has nearly gone out. Only a few glowing coals remain, red and pulsing softly beneath the ash. He doesn't stoke it. It doesn't need to be revived. The fire, like the day, has done its work. He gathers the empty baskets, wipes down the stone hearth, and sweeps the floor in slow, looping strokes. The broom bristles whisper against the stone. Kind, familiar sound. When all is in order, he closes the shutters and draws the small iron latch across the door. The bakery is dim now, lit only by the fading light that sneaks in through the cracks and the soft orange from a single beeswax candle. He pauses, taking in the quiet. The bread is gone. The fire is low. The bench is empty once more. But the day feels full. And as the last light leaves the sky, the baker finally rests. Not just his hands, but his mind. And outside, the village drifts softly into dusk. As the sun reaches its zenith and the village settles into the quieter rhythm of midday, Thomas finds himself with a rare gift time. The morning's bread has been sold, the next day's preparations are well in hand, and the afternoon stretches before him like a calm river flowing toward evening. It's during these precious interludes that Thomas allows himself to step away from the constant demands of his craft and simply be present in the world around him. He takes his own small loaf, a round cob still warm from the oven, its crust golden and inviting, and walks to his favorite spot in the village. Just behind the church, an ancient elm tree spreads its massive branches, creating a natural shelter that has served as a gathering place for longer than anyone can remember. The tree's trunk is so large that 3 grown men holding hands couldn't encircle it, and its canopy provides shade in summer and a windbreak in winter. Thomas settles against the elm's sturdy trunk, feeling the rough bark against his back through his woolen tunic. From this vantage point, he can observe the gentle ebb and flow of village life without being called upon to participate in it. It's a perspective he treasures, the view of someone who belongs completely to this place but can occasionally step back and see it with the clarity that comes from brief detachment. He breaks open his bread, releasing a small cloud of steam that carries the familiar aroma he knows so well. The crust cracks pleasantly under his fingers, revealing the tender, hole-filled interior that speaks of proper fermentation and careful baking. Thomas eats slowly, savoring not just the flavor, but the satisfaction of consuming something he created with his own hands from the simplest ingredients. The bread is good, better than good. The crust has exactly the right balance of crispness and chewiness, while the interior is light and flavorful, with that subtle tang that comes from the wild yeasts in his carefully maintained starter. Thomas allows himself a moment of professional pride. After 15 years of daily bread making, he can still feel genuine pleasure in achieving the perfect loaf. As he eats, Thomas watches the life of the village unfold around him. A group of children plays an elaborate game involving sticks and a leather ball, their rules apparently known only to themselves but applied with the serious intensity that children bring to their diversions. Their laughter carries clearly in the still air, a sound that speaks of health and happiness and all the simple joys that make life worth living. Near the well, 3 women gather with their laundry, taking advantage of the warm afternoon sun to dry their washing while they talk. Thomas can't hear their words from this distance, but he can see the easy familiarity of their interactions. Hands that gesture expressively, heads that nod in understanding, the occasional burst of shared laughter that speaks of friendship and mutual support. In the distance, he can see men working in the fields, their movements steady and purposeful as they complete the day's necessary labor. The harvest is nearly finished now, the grain safely gathered and stored against the coming winter. Soon, those same fields will lie fallow under the first snows, resting and renewing themselves for another year's planting. Thomas thinks about the cycles that govern his life and the lives of everyone around him. There's the daily cycle of work and rest, the weekly cycle marked by the church bell and the Sabbath, the seasonal cycle of planting and harvest, growth and dormancy. These rhythms have structured human life for countless generations, providing a framework of meaning and purpose that modern people, with their artificial lights and climate-controlled environments, have largely lost. But here, in this medieval village, the cycles still hold sway. Thomas rises with the sun and sleeps with the darkness. His work varies with the seasons. Lighter breads in summer when people work hard in the heat, heartier loaves in winter when bodies need more fuel to stay warm. The ingredients he uses change with the calendar: fresh herbs in spring and summer, preserved fruits and vegetables as autumn progresses into winter. He thinks about his own place in the larger cycle of generations. His father stood where Thomas stands now, learning the craft that he would pass on to his son. Someday, God willing, young William will stand here too, master of the same skills, keeper of the same traditions, serving the same essential human needs that have always required daily bread. The thought brings Thomas a deep sense of continuity and purpose. He's not just making bread. He's maintaining an unbroken chain of knowledge and service that stretches back through centuries and will, he hopes, continue long after he's gone. His hands perform the same motions his great-grandfather's hands performed, guided by the same accumulated wisdom, serving the same fundamental human need. A gentle breeze stirs the elm's leaves, creating a soft rustling that mingles with the distant sounds of the village. Thomas closes his eyes and listens to this symphony of ordinary life. The creak of a cart will somewhere down the lane, the lowing of cattle in the pasture beyond the church, the rhythmic sound of someone splitting wood for their evening fire. These sounds speak to him of stability and peace, of a world where everyone knows their place and purpose. There are no great mysteries in Thomas's life, no burning questions about meaning or direction. He knows exactly why he rises each morning and exactly what the day will require of him. There's profound comfort in this certainty, a kind of peace that comes from living in harmony with both nature and community. As he sits in the dappled shade of the elm, Thomas reflects on the morning's customers and the small interactions that make up the fabric of his days. Old Martha, with her precise needs and gentle conversation. Young Robert, eager to please his master and make his way in the world through honest craftsmanship. Anna the weaver, concerned about her daughter but grateful for the child's recovery. Each person who enters his bakery brings their own story, their own needs, their own contribution to the larger tapestry of village life. Thomas realizes that he knows these stories not through dramatic revelations or intense conversations, but through the slow accumulation of daily encounters. A word here, a gesture there, the gradual building of understanding that comes from serving the same people day after day, year after year. This is how community really works, not through grand declarations of fellowship, but through the patient weaving together of countless small threads of mutual dependence and care. The afternoon sun warms his face as Thomas finishes the last of his bread, brushing the crumbs from his tunic and watching them scatter on the ground where they'll feed the birds that make their homes in the elm's branches. Even this small act connects him to the larger cycles of nature. Nothing is wasted. Everything has its place and purpose. He thinks about Margaret, probably at home now preparing their midday meal with ingredients from their own garden and preserves put up during the summer's abundance. He thinks about William, perhaps helping his mother or exploring the village with his friends, learning through play and observation the skills and knowledge he'll need as he grows toward manhood. These thoughts fill Thomas with quiet satisfaction. His life may not encompass great adventures or remarkable achievements, but it contains something perhaps more valuable: the deep contentment that comes from work that matters, relationships that endure, and the knowledge that his daily efforts contribute to something larger and more lasting than himself. The church bell chimes the hour, its bronze voice carrying clearly across the village and reminding Thomas that even this peaceful interlude must come to an end. Soon, he'll need to return to his bakery to prepare for the afternoon's small but steady stream of customers. Perhaps a traveler seeking bread for the road, or a housewife who needs an extra loaf for unexpected guests. But for now, in this moment of perfect autumn peace, Thomas allows himself to simply exist in gratitude for the life he's been given. The elm tree shelters him, the sun warms him, the village spreads around him in all its familiar beauty, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of children's laughter rises like a prayer of thanksgiving for the simple, enduring gifts of home and community and meaningful work. Shadows stretch across the cobblestone paths like the long arms of tired trees, reaching slowly into the crevices between worn stones. The final rays of sunlight catch the edge of moss-covered rooftops and shuttered windows, bathing the village in a hushed gold that quickly cools to a soft, silvery gray. There is no rush here, no bustling footsteps or shouting from stalls. Only the low hum of the day exhaling, releasing its final breath. The marketplace, once alive with the quiet chatter of tradespeople and the shuffle of worn shoes, now lies still. An empty wooden crate rocks ever so slightly in the breeze, nudged by a wind that carries with it the mingled scents of rosemary, old stone, and wood smoke. The cloth awnings that shaded produce just hours ago now hang limp and soft, resting until the morning returns. A few figures linger. A grandmother gently shakes out a rug over her porch railing, then pauses to watch the slow drift of smoke from her neighbor's chimney. Across the square, a boy sits on a stone step with a stick in hand, idly drawing circles in the dust. He hums to himself, a quiet tune passed down from someone older, someone who once sat just like this. From the baker's cottage at the heart of the village, warm light spills through uneven wooden shutters, flickering against the gathering dusk. Inside, the baker moves slowly now. The demands of the day have faded, leaving behind only routine and ritual. He lifts a soft cloth from a rising loaf on the table, presses 2 fingers gently into the dough, and nods to himself, satisfied. Outside his door, the faint sound of a wooden spoon tapping against a pot carries down the street like a lullaby. The village animals have begun to settle. Chickens murmur in quiet tones as they roost, feathers fluffed and eyes already half closed. A small dog circles twice on a folded wool blanket before sighing deeply and resting its head on its paws. Even the horses in the stable seem subdued, their quiet huffing rhythmic and soft as they nuzzle into the straw. Up above, the sky deepens. Where blue once ruled, shades of plum and smoke now roll in. A single star blinks to life, tentative and small, just above the chimney line. Then another, and another. Soon, a full sky will spill open above the village. But for now, the stars appear one by one, like sleepy eyes blinking into the night. The baker steps outside his door for a moment, wiping his hands on a cloth, his apron streaked with flour and soot. He leans on the doorframe, eyes on the quiet square, breathing in the stillness that only comes in this sliver of the day. Not quite night, but no longer day. His shoulders soften. Behind him, the last of the loaves rest on a cooling rack, steam curling lazily from the crust. He glances at the sky, not to check the time, there is no clock to watch, but to feel the rhythm of the evening settle into place. It's a rhythm he's known for years, a rhythm older than the stone beneath his feet. And inside, a kettle begins to hum on the hearth. Soon, he'll sit with a mug of something warm, the fire low, the room dim, and the house quiet but for the sound of crickets outside and the gentle ticking of wood contracting in the walls. But for now, he lingers at the door, taking in this brief moment between labor and rest. Soon the candles will be blown out. Soon the hush will deepen, but not yet.